Well, I always cracked up especially when I lived in LA. People who were basically doing coffee shops or doing 8 minute sets, like you said, they would go and
Right,
then they'd record a comedy album. And I'm thinking, where are you
right,
going to sell this comedy album? It's not
right.
like you're on the road headlining and people come out and go, oh, $15. Here's no one knows you. And I was always like, they see him on Facebook. Oh, I have this comedy album. I'm like, you don't play any clubs. Like you're doing 40 minute set when you maybe have, as you said, 7 or 8 minutes. And I always cracked up because I'm like, because you remember back in the day, like a comedy album. I remember driving, listening to Emo's album and Sam
Of
Kinison
course.
and places like they were releases
Right.
like a band album. But now it's like it's basically
Well, it's the
you
same
could do
thing.
an album at a bringer show.
Yeah, but it's the same thing with specials. Everyone has specials now, and I'm like, I've said this before. I remember a time when a comedy special was special. I'm gonna. I said if I ever do one because I'm too busy with the Funny Women brand, but people go, when are you gonna when are you going to do a special? I said, well, I'm not gonna call it a special. I'm gonna call it like an average.
This is Coop's Comedy Corner. Buckle up because it's funny as Coop's Comedy Corner.
Welcome to Coop's Comedy Corner. I'm your host, Steve Cooper. I gotta tell you, people, we've been doing the show for about 35 episodes, and my other podcast, Cooper Talk, where I've done over 1,400 episodes. I don't know my guests before they come on, but the Coop's Comedy Corner, I know most of my guests, but I don't know my guest today. I was looking for a good guest, and my friend Julia Scotti was on, and she said, "What about Carole Montgomery?" And I knew of Carole Montgomery. I mean, she's working with my friends Wendy Lee, and she's working with a bunch of people I know. So I had to have her on, and my guest is Carole Montgomery. How you doing, Carole?
Good. I'm good. I'm good. Good. Glad to finally meet you, even if it's over the internet.
Now, I want to start off with your show. It's going to be in Vegas, June 11th and 12th. I am my father's son.
Yeah.
Tell me all about it. What's the show about?
Well, I okay. So a little backstory. I lived in Vegas for 10 years. Wow, it's almost yeah over almost 20 years ago. So basically my son from the time he was 4 till he was 14. So I was there, and I premiered my first solo show there because I was working in burlesque shows, and the solo show is called Confessions of a PT&A Mom. And so I was there, and then recently the gentleman whose theater I premiered the first solo show is doing. He's in charge of it's called Fallout Fringe in Las Vegas, and it's very, very progressive and wild and guerrilla type of theater. And he said, "You want to come and do PT&A Mom?" And I said, "I've actually been working on a new solo show called I Am My Father's Son, so I'm doing it with the people that produced my first show." Basically, it's basically a discussion of the tagline I'm using is, "Do you ever wonder why you became the person you became?" And so it basically goes through my past and talks about why I was meant to be a comedian. Because when you hear the story, you go, "Oh yeah, there was nothing else she was going to do." So, do you know what I mean? My father was a bartender in the Catskills in the Borscht Belt in the early '60s. I used to help him set up the bar while Jackie Mason and Toady Fields and Rodney Dangerfield show up. It was like, so of course I was 8 years old. I mean, I liked it. So that's basically the gist of the story.
Now, when you're sitting there as you're a stand-up, and when you're doing a one-person show, how do you attack
Right,
it? Because I did a storytelling show a little while ago, and it's a lot different. Because comedy, we're used to getting laughs, but these shows, there's peaks
right.
and valleys. A storytelling show, one-person show. So how do you go? I mean, it's your second one. How did you approach the first one? And approaching this one different than when you approached how you approached the first one?
Not at all. And first of all, I work with entertainers. They don't have to be comedians, actors, musicians. I develop solo shows. I directed Jim Florentine's show, I'm Your Savior, which is on Amazon Prime right now. So I mean, I've worked with lots of people. So I basically have a good eye for what a solo show is. The only different a solo show, like you said, the peaks and valleys. There's some. I just did a reading of the show in Astoria, and there were laughs at places I didn't expect them to be. So the thing about a solo show is that you're being more honest to the audience about who you are as a person. I mean, there'll be jokes and there'll be laughter, of course, but there's also poignancy and there's also some sad things that happen. And so that's the difference. I always talk about this. And what's funny is I was just on a radio show with him, but on Sirius XM, Christopher Titus did a solo show. Oh God, it's got to be over 30 years ago because I remember seeing that solo show when I was thinking about writing it. And he did it in Montreal at the Just for Laughs festival. It was a gala, and that's where he ended up getting his first sitcom, Titus. But it was such a brutal show because it was funny, but there he goes into some heavy, when I say heavy, I mean heavy duty shit. And he silences the crowd. There's a moment where everyone has literally collectively held their breath. And then in the next beat, he tells this joke, and you can actually hear the laughter sounds like it's exploding off of the ceiling. That's how, because it was relief and it was funny. So that's how, what I do is I model most of my shows after Chris. And I finally, after all these years, got to tell him in person that you're the reason that I do it the way I do, because comics are so afraid of not getting the laugh, and you have to trust yourself. I've been doing stand up over 40 years. Sometimes I throw a crowd just because I'm bored. And I don't, so knowing full well that I'll be able to get them back, but I like to do that. I'm not worried about whether or not I'm going to get a laugh. At this point in my career, I know I'm funny. You know what I mean?
Well, I always say that too. I also think it comes with writing. As you get older, like I mean, I've been doing comedy and I've been in and out of it. I'm back more into it. You know what's funny because you're doing it for a long time. When you write a bit, you know if it will work or not. And I think if you have the confidence to deliver it, because as you said, we've been on stage a lot. I mean, you're right. You know if it's going to come through or if it's going to shit the bed.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, the surprise was with the solo show was that that I got laughs where I wasn't expecting them. So that was really fun, and it made me excited to continue to do it. Like I'm sure we'll talk about it on the show, but working with the Funny Women brand, which is a brand, it's something I'm on pretty much 24/7, to be able to just walk away from that and just concentrate on this, because it's not, it's a different story. The Funny Women brand is all about being older and breaking down barriers for older women. With this, I just get to talk about, that I worship my dad, So it's for me, it's great creatively. And at my age, at 67, to be able to have the synapses work, because that's the biggest fear, I think, in comedy in general is, when you get older, your brain just doesn't, you know, work the way it's supposed to work. And so, with these younger comics, when they're out doing 4 or 5 sets a night, sure. If I can't do 4 or 5 sets a night, I mean, I'm in bed by 10. Do you know what I mean? So to be able to have something creatively like this is great for me.
So take me back to when you started comedy. I know you were in New York, but you said the show says why you were born to get into comedy, you're 8 years old, but what made you decide to get on stage that first time, and tell me about it?
Well, okay. Well, I was doing summer stock. I wanted to be in theater. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in theater. So I decided that I was going to be a techie. And I was working like, back then there were all these little theater companies. I'd paint sets and lights and stage manage. And I loved it. So I decided to go away for the summer at a place called Playhouse on the Hill. It's in a college in Ithaca. And when you're a crew member, you're working all day long. You're working 10, 12 hours. You blow off of some steam. You're sitting around drinking. And one day, my friend Ed, and I always blame him. And like I always say to people, if you're mad that I became a comedian, blame that guy. He said to me, "You should be a comedian." And I said, "I don't." Now here's where it's different, because when you say that now, everyone knows what a comedian is. I started in 79. People, there were comedians, kind of. All I remember going is like, you mean like what? Like I don't understand what you mean. He goes, well, you do 5 minutes like Johnny Carson. Because I didn't know from stand-up comedy then. Stand-up comedy was, nobody knew what a stand-up comic was. So we decided they were having a party. We were doing a Christmas in July party. And my friend Ed sat with me and we wrote 5 minutes. And I got on stage and I mean on stage, wherever where there's the the theater was in a barn, so I was probably next to the cows, and I just started doing the 5 minutes, and I loved it. And when I got back from that, is when I ended up going to Pips for the first time, which was in Sheepshead Bay, very well known. David Brenner started there, Dice came out of there, Richie Jenny came out of there, I came out of there. Joan Rivers used to go by there, so that's what I did. I started to go because it was I wasn't one of these people. Like I used to go in the city all the time. So getting on the train and schlepping into the city, but this was less of a schlep. In other words, you going into the city was north, going to Sheepshead Bay was like a 20-minute bus ride. So, and I would get up on stage and start doing it. And the line I always say is because it was a predominantly Italian audience and women, I was the only woman, they all wanted me to get off stage and make sauce.
Well, I was going to ask you, what was it like in the early days? Because it wasn't, I mean, I remember the Philly scene. I started in '88. We didn't have many female comics. There wasn't, there
Right,
was only, it's so funny looking back now, the open mic, we only had like 25 acts. I mean, now there's like,
right,
they
right,
forget it. You can't even get, there's not even, that's like
right.
a little bit of it. But there was only like 3 or 4 women at the time. What was it like for you? Because it was a predominantly male uh, business back then.
Um, I it's interesting. Yeah, I was basically the only woman. I just, I grew up in the 70s where that was all the, Virginia Slims, you're a woman, you can do it, all that bullshit. And I felt and I believed it. So I didn't think being a woman, I didn't think my gender had any, there was, if I was funny, I was going on stage. I mean, that's something I do discuss in the show too about, that I never felt like a girl anyway. I'm basically a guy with tits. So for me,
Right.
um, I never understood why, oh, I wasn't funny because I was a woman. I just went and did my stuff. I mean, I would get hit on constantly, but that's part of the comedy game. But soon after, probably I would say I met my husband in 81 and I started in September of 79. So about a year and a half into it, I was with my husband. I wasn't married, but back then there was some kind of bro rule. It was like, oh, she has a boyfriend. I'm not going to bother her anymore. So, it's interesting because, I know that it affected the type of work I got, but I just kept going. I like I said, I have somewhere in my soul that this was the only thing I was supposed to do.
Now, when did you start hitting your groove when you felt confident with your act? When did you start going into the city? You probably went to Catch, probably went to those places. But when did you start feeling? I mean, did you sit there? Was it quickly that you really got into those clubs, or was it take a while after Pips?
Well, there was a lot of competition because there were only, I talk about this when I talk about funny women, but there were if there were 10 women, that was a lot. And we were all vying for the only woman on the show spot. So there was a lot of competition. I ended up being a regular at Catch. I couldn't, I wasn't but yeah, like I said, it's not like it is now where everyone produces shows, so you're a regular everywhere. But I was a regular at Catch. That was where I worked. I didn't pass at the comic strip. I didn't pass at the Improv because there was an unnamed comic who used to sit next to Silver and whisper in her ear about people, and she was female, so she wasn't going to let any other woman pass at the club. So I ended up at Catch a Rising Star, and then there was a small club, which is now a Dunkin' Donuts, but like down the block from what was now called Rodney's, but the old Dangerfields. It used to be. It was a like a American restaurant. It was a bar with burgers and fries, usual typical stuff. And then downstairs it was the basement because I always work in a fucking basement. That's going to be on my tombstone. I'm always in a basement. Um, And he had, and if it sat 30 people, it was a lot of people. But it was a gentleman named Peter Spellos, and who passed away recently, R.I.P. And he decided to do comedy there, and he was an improv actor, so we used to do improv. And he was the one. I would work every weekend there, and that's where I started to get strong, because you can't. When even now, like when you do mics, it's really hard. It's hard to get strong, because there's just so many people, there's not enough spots. Like, I know so many of my friends, male and female, that say to me, I'm not working, I'm not getting any spots. And it's like, and they take it personal. I said, there's 8 billion comics in New York City alone, and there's only, how many clubs? 7, 8 clubs. So that's why, for me, when I need to work on stuff, I mean, I can call clubs. I'm very lucky. I can call a club. When I was working on the second and third specials, I could call a club and go, I'm coming in to do my 10 minutes, and they would put me up. But that's not guaranteed. But now, how do you even, you go to the bar shows, you keep doing the bar shows, and you get strong that way. They nurtured you. The only club that does that now in New York City is the New York City Comedy Club. They still have late night, and I think the comic strip might have late night, but I was never a strip act. But I like that that's when you're supposed to go on. You're supposed to go on and to the 6 people who are drunk and learn.
That's like, when I started in Philly, there was a guy, the Comedy Factory outlet was one of the open mics, and one of the regulars there would say, no matter what number you draw from the open mic, because you picked out of a hat, always go on. And I always listen to it, because sometimes you're right, you go up to like 3 people, but at least you were up there, and you didn't just sit there and go, oh, I just took the speed line into Philly, walked a few blocks, and didn't want to go on because there's no one there. And it is important, because that's where you get your teeth, because you sit there and you're getting used to silence because there's like 3 people there.
Right. I mean, there's a comic named Mike Rowe who ends up, I want to say, I don't think he didn't create Futurama, but he wrote on Futurama, and he's a great writer now. He gave up stand-up a while ago.
I know Mike.
But I remember, Mike Rowe, right? Did you know him?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yes.
I remember
he did my other podcast.
Okay, so and I remember he said he must have called me on the old phone. We didn't have cells back then, and said, I have a 3:55 spot. There's nobody going to be there. Can you come hang out? And was like, yeah, sure. I sat with him while there was 2 people. 3:55 a.m. 4:00 in the fucking morning. And then we went out and had breakfast, which is why I have high cholesterol. I blame you, Mike Rowe. I blame you. But you know what I mean? Like, that's what we did, So, I mean, it's a different time now.
Now, you were working in New York. Now, what makes you end up going to LA? Because I know you moved to LA.
Well, I was a road comic for years. Okay. And once again, I sound like I'm 90 years old, but the rule back then was you got yourself strong. And as soon as you got strong, you went to LA. Like, I was doing the one-nighters and doing some road work, but really, if the next step in a comics career was to move to Los Angeles. So I did. And I, it was tough at the beginning. It was very tough. I moved there. Okay. So now you see this, I do this because because now we're getting into my son. So I probably moved there in 88. And I would literally live in Los Angeles, but fly back east or like to the Midwest, because I was headlining and working. I was but I would go back and forth. And then I did a bunch of TV, all the TV shows that you were supposed to do, improv, VH1, MTV, all that bullshit. And I said to my husband, I'm not going to get all these shows for another year, because back then it was only a year rotation, because they needed, you would go back. There wasn't as many comics, so there was only a year rotation. So I said, you know what, if I'm gonna have a child, now's the time. So I got pregnant during my break, and then I was back on TV 6 months. No. Well, how old was my son? I was pregnant with Lynn. I was pregnant on Evening at the Improv. I was 8 months pregnant on Evening at the Improv. Bud was afraid to hug me. because he thought I was going to break my water. And I so should have done this. And I wish I had. He was so terrified. I mean, I was so pregnant. I should have had a glass of water and spilt it behind me and went, oh my God, I broke water. It would have killed him. He was so, he hugged me in such a, he was like this. He was hugging me like so far away from me. And so I did that. And then I had my son. I want to say I was on TV 2 months later, because everyone said to me, if you have a kid, you're going to ruin your career. I'm like, watch me. Don't ever tell me I can't do something. If you want me to do something, tell me I can't. That's how you get me to do it. Because, I'm like, what do you mean I'm going to ruin my career? Because that stupid 70s, I can make it, whatever that stupid Virginia Slims commercial was. I can make my man breakfast, So that was me. I was listening to that Helen Reddy song way too fucking much.
Well, so when you're in LA and so you're doing TV, and now what is your concentration then at that point? Because you said, you're going to have a kid. So what were your plans when you had the kid, to keep doing stand-up or try to get on TV as in acting roles? What was your focus at that point when you had your son?
Well, interesting. It's on my bucket list, so I still haven't done it yet. I've acted. I've actually acted in some small indie, shorts and stuff like that. But I've never done a sitcom, like a network sitcom. That was always my dream. So my bucket list, but it's different now, because back then I wanted to be the star of the sitcom. Now all I want to do is I want to open up the door, say something wacky, and leave. Do you know what I mean? I want to be Doris Roberts. That's basically, I want to take whatever.
I always said I wanted to be the and person. At the end when it goes and, Steve Cooper is the weird neighbor. Right. That's what for me. It's always like, that's what I want. I wouldn't want to be a star.
Yeah, now that really that, and it's only because there's, like I said, that of course that I was meant to be a comic, but the few times I've been on set, like when we did the first special, Fran Drescher was the and she was very sweet. If you're going to be a star, be that woman. That woman is the most humble human being I've ever met in my life. So she had her assistant reach out. She goes, I'm going to be doing stand-up at the Improv. I want you to open for me. And I said, okay. And so I flew out there, and it was also while she was filming her new show. She goes, come as my guest. And every time I'm on the set of a sitcom, it just feels right to me. I just love everything about it, and so eventually, somebody who's listening will say, let's put the old woman on before she dies. And, but you know what I mean? Like that's really the only thing. That was what my goal was. But what happened to me was, I was, then I had my child. I'd done all the TV. I had done the big show that I had done just after my son was born. Was the first big show was the Showtime Comedy All Stars. That was the one that Don Rickles had hosted, and it started my relationship with Showtime. But I had done all that, so I was still going back on the road, and I was doing that. And I don't think I've ever told this story. I mean, I've told it, but not on podcasts. So I was working in Las Vegas at the Riviera Comedy Club, and I was putting away. My son was about 3 or 4. And he didn't want me to leave. He hated it because I'd wake him up in the morning and he'd cry, and he was like, he had Jewish guilt down way early in his life. And so I so remember this vividly. I was in the Riviera, and when I used to go on the road, because I used to be on the road all the time, I would bring pictures and stuff. And so I was putting everything, when you're unpacking, I'm like putting the pictures and I'm putting away my toiletries. And I remember putting all my toiletries on, in the bathroom, thinking, oh man, wouldn't it be nice to just be able to not have to leave so I could stay home and raise my son? And literally the next day, Steve Sharippa, who was the entertainment director at the Riv at the time, calls me and says, the comic from Crazy Girls had a heart attack, and she's going to be out for the month. Can you sub for her? So that first week I did 27 shows, because I did the shows at the Riviera Comedy Club, and then I would go and do. So I did 2 shows at the Riviera Comedy Club, and then I do 2 shows at Crazy Girls, and I went back and forth. So it was like 27 shows in 1 week. And at the end of the week, they offered me a contract. They said, we want you to stay.
Now, what kind of was it? When it was so the Crazy Girls review, it was burlesque and then
Right.
comedy. Were you doing full sets, or what was your like the rib you're doing your regular set?
I
How
was
did
there
you
to give
incorporate into that show?
I was there to give the naked girls a rest. That's basically what it was. You know what I mean? Like I would come out at the beginning, I would welcome everybody to the show, and then they'd do their little number, and then like halfway through the show, I'd come out and do like 10 minutes. It was a great gig. It was a great gig. It paid well. It afforded me to stay home, is what I wanted to, it got me to raise my child. I raised him from 4 to 14. I was home, I took him to school every day. Would take him to school. It was very funny. I always did because I get home late. I get home at like midnight or 1 o'clock, and then have to be up to take him to school. And I was fine about it until about April. And then at some point in April, the alarm would ring, and I'd lean over to my husband and go, "You're fucking taking him to school today. I'm not taking him to school today. I am done. I'm sleeping in." And then the next day I'd be fine. But yeah, it was a great gig. And then after 5 years, they decided to go in a different direction. So we were going to move back to New York then. And then I got a call to be in another burlesque show called Midnight Fantasy. So I ended up there for 3 years.
Now, how did you like the living? I lived in Vegas for a year, but this was 30 years ago. How did you like living in Vegas? Was it something that being an entertainer and being on a show like that? Did you get to go to a lot of shows because you were in the industry there?
Um, Not really. I mean, because I mean, I only had Mondays off. So I didn't really, and when I first got the gig, I was like, yeah, I'll be auditions and be able to fly to LA. That never happened. You know what I mean? I just basically, that's what the show Confessions of a PTA Mom was about. I mean, I was basically a mom doing all the mom stuff, Little League, PTA, bake sales, all that stuff while working in a titty show. I mean, that's what I was doing. And I wanted, my focus at that point was to raise my son. I didn't care about anything else. I just wanted to raise him and be home for him.
Now, when that show ended, what do you do then? Because it must be when you have that paycheck coming every week, when you have the perfect schedule for you. I mean, even though it was late night, you could raise your son, but all of a sudden now, and that's 8 years of your life. It's not like you were doing it for a year. That between both shows, you had a very big chunk of your professional career, which you were doing what you love. You were getting to stay at home. So when that ends, what are your goals? What do you want to do at that point? Because your whole life, it seems to shift something. It probably has to shift because everything you did is going to be different now.
Well, it's interesting because I look back at it now, and everything happens for a reason. You know what I mean? So we had been wanting to go back to New York because we wanted. It's just this how bad the schools are in Vegas. We wanted my son to go to school. We wanted my son to go to high school in New York City. That's how bad the schools are in Vegas. But we had been wanting to go back. So when the second show wanted to go in a different direction, and it's all about money and producing and stuff like that, because I was paid very well for both shows. So I had to start all over again. Nobody knew who I was. It was wild. It was because remember now, I wasn't only gone because altogether I had been in Vegas for 10 years, but I had also been in Los Angeles for 10 years. So I was well known in Los Angeles. I was well known in Vegas. I hadn't been in New York. I hadn't stepped on a stage in New York in 20 years. So everyone's like, who the fuck are you? Get to the back of the line. So that was brutal. And now it's almost 20 years that I'm back in New York City. So but I had to, this is when I noticed that the internet started to mess things up, because when I moved back, it was just when MySpace was happening and Dane Cook and that whole thing about, and I always say the comics are, we're not very original. Let's just say that, because when somebody makes it on a platform, everyone goes, well, I have to go to that platform now. So, really, and it's, this, you see it now. Well, now I have to make video go viral. I have 7 minutes, but I'm going to make a video go viral. It's like, guys, you got to do the stand up first. You got to learn how to be a comic before you have people come, because you're going to do 7 minutes. And then the audience is going to be like, I paid $25 for this.
Well, I always cracked up especially when I lived in LA, people who were basically doing coffee shops or doing 8-minute sets, like you said, they would go and then they'd record a comedy album. And I'm thinking, where are you going to sell this comedy album? It's not like you're on the road headlining and people come out and go, oh, $15. Here's no one knows you. And I was always like, they see them on Facebook. Oh, I have this comedy album. I'm like, you don't play any clubs. Like you're doing a 40-minute set when you maybe have, as you said, 7 or 8 minutes. And I always cracked up because I'm like, because you remember back in the day, like a comedy album, I remember driving, listening to Emo's album and Sam Kinison and places, like they were releases, like a band album. But now it's like, it's basically, you could do an album at a bringer show.
Yeah, but it's the same thing with specials. Everyone has specials now. And I'm like, I've said this before. I remember a time when a comedy special was special. I said, if I ever do one, because I'm too busy with the Funny Women brand, but people go, when are you going to do a special? I said, well, I'm not going to call it a special. I'm going to call it like an average. I'm not, like, it's like, I understand, like, but that's part of the whole thing. Like I said about that, comics are not very original. If one comic does something well, then everyone says, oh, I can do that. And it's like, guys, and look, there for the people listening, there are plenty of examples. You don't have to say, oh, but what am I saying? So he did that. That's, if there's 50,000 comics, two may have a special that's worth watching. But I'm spoiled. Like when I did my specials, when I did the Funny Women specials, it was produced by Showtime. It was a legitimate special. One of the things I love about, besides the fact that each of the women were amazing, is it looks great. It looks good. I spent time going, I want it to look a certain way. Now you see people like they're coming in, it's grainy and they're not, it looks like maybe they didn't shower. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're doing a special,
There's not that professional. There's not the show in it, and you do want to look good. I was cracking up because there's a comic I know who he sells his CDs after the show, but he never got like a case made, so he just sells a CD with his name written on it. And I'm like, throw some extra bucks in and make it a little more professional, because no one wants someone's going to pay $15 for a burnt CD that says your name in black magic marker.
Right. But, and look, I understand back in the day why people did that, because, okay, when I was on the road and you were headlining, you were making good money, plus hotel, plus airfare. The middle act was making good money. The opener was making good money. Now they barely pay the opener. The feature has to, I understand it, because they were like, well, I have to supplement somehow. If you were making $1,000 back then and you used to be able to make at least $1,000 as a feature. Okay. So now it's 400, there's $600 you've got to make up. So I understand it, but like I said, but then you get people that are like you said, they're doing mics and they're like, well, I'm going to do an album. I'm like, okay, go for it. Enjoy.
Now let's get to Funny Women of a Certain Age, because it's Julia recently did one. I know my friend Wendy Liebman has done it. When did the whole process start? Because it is great, because we think about it. Women doing comedy as they get older haven't always been as accepted as men doing it as they get older.
Right.
I mean, Milton Berle was 90. You don't understand what the fuck he was saying, but it was Milton Berle. And I mean, you had Joan Rivers, but it was a different. For some reason, people were like, "Oh, well, wait a second, it's not right." So, how did you come up with the idea, and was it hard to get that first one produced? And then, why are you how have you been so lucky to develop a brand?
Well, I worked my ass off. That's why. I mean, yes, there was luck involved, but like, I worked my ass off.
I mean, lucky that's a lucky streak that you get to do. I mean, that's a great thing that you can do.
Well, what's interesting about this story is that this never happens. What happened to me never happens in show business. Okay, I had come up with the idea. I had been on a podcast with a bunch of other women. Don't remember the name of the podcast, but we were, and they were all older. We were around the same age, and we were dying. We were just laughing and having the best time. And I remember calling my husband. I was walking back to the subway, and I said, they should do a show. There should be a comedy show like this where it's older women doing stand up, and he said, my husband's heard my ideas for 40 years, and he goes, this is a good one. Like we all got excited about it, and it snowballed. It basically snowballed. What had happened is I had just come up with the idea. I had not done a damn show, and then there's a young lady named Corey Spencer who was doing stand up. I think she moved out of the city. I forget where she is now. She might be in New Orleans. I'm not sure, but she was doing a thing called the Cinder Block Comedy Festival, and it was in Brooklyn. And we had struck up a relationship online on Facebook, and it was basically geared towards women, people of color, LGBTQIA, all that groups. And she was getting shit from white cis males. And we were talking about it. And I said, listen, if anybody gives you shit, tell them that, like just mention my name and they'll leave you alone because people are afraid of me. Rightly so. I mean, I've always been that, really? You want to go? Let's go. I will jump into a fire just to prove a fucking point. So I was talking to her about the show, and she said, why don't you premiere it at the Cinder Block? So it was in 2017 in September. She says, I'll book the show, you book the show. I had a little, like, the gag is that the MC was a millennial. It was Rhonda Hanson, myself, Judy Gold, Janine Garofalo, and Jamie. She was the host. And Nikki Carr from Las Vegas. And it went over, it was a packed house. It went over better than I could ever have expected it. And somebody in the audience at that point worked for this small theater called The Crane on the Lower East Side in the city. And she said, I think my boss would like this. I said, oh, okay. So we did a show for him in December, and he loved it. He said, why don't you do this monthly? You can do a residency here. And that turned into 6 years. And what was great about it is that, so we did the September, December, then January. I think February is when we had a big showcase for all the network people. And we had a deal in April. That's unheard of. From September to April in, 6 months, 7 months, it's unheard of.
Now, who were some of the acts when you were doing it? You're with the residents. Who were some of the acts you were bringing in at that time?
Oh, everybody's done that. I mean, people that haven't done the show. I mean, Veronica Mosey, Leanne was on that. Vanessa was on that. I had Nancy Parker, Rhonda Hanson. I mean, just any older female comic, especially from my generation, because it wasn't a lot of money. It was only a city spot money, but it was a way to, and people just kept coming to see it. And then of course when we got the specials, I knew exactly who I was going to put in the shows. I'm sure Julia told you the story that she was supposed to be in the first one, and then she had the heart incident.
Right. So the first one is for Showtime, and you get Fran Drescher. Now, did you lobby to get Fran Drescher, or did she sit there and go, I want to be involved? How did you get her attached to the project?
That was my producer partner. He said, what about, because we were thinking, like, what famous person can we get? So like Ellen DeGeneres was at one point we were talking to Rosie's people, but then she couldn't do it. And then Ellen was, like we wanted to get a big name. And I forgot he had some contact with Fran Drescher. He goes, what about Fran? I said, I'd love to have Fran, because even though she's not a stand-up per se, she's a great comedic actress. She's a great comedic. She's so funny. And I knew she was going to do a great job, which she did. And then it was Fran. It was Fran, Lynn Koplitz, Carrie Louise, Vanessa Hollingshead, and Lunel. So out of that group, like, I call it the funny, how Colbert says the Colbert bump. So I'm like, because, Lunel blew up, and Fran, got her sitcom right after that. So I call it the funny women bump. So we've had some great people on the shows.
Now, after that, you get do that first special. In
Mhm.
your mind, are you thinking, I'm going to do a bunch of these? I mean, are you sitting there going, this is a great brand? Or, I mean, how quick was it for you to get a second special? And in between getting specials, were you still doing the live shows?
Oh yeah, the live show. It's kind of funny because the live show's always been the most important thing to me. The specials were great because it only just gives us more, what's the word? People can see it. There's more people watch it than they know about the show. But it was always to do what happened with it. I've always wanted, and I'm working on this second part now. I've always wanted to do this uh, as like an evening at the improv, but for older women, for lack of a better word. I come out, host it, and then showcase 3 older female comics. But in show business, you can't do that because they have to have a star or they have to have someone behind the scenes that's a star. So that's why we were like, all right, we'll have a celebrity and then we'll have the up and coming comics. Because I've said this because there are some women that were upset with me because they didn't get to be on the show, and I was like, it's my show and I basically run everything, but I I can't stand on principle if I go, no, we have to have that person on. They'll go, okay, no shows. That's the way the business works. You can only do that when it's a super hit. Like with Roseanne, she was very, nobody knows this, but she was not as crazy as she was at the first season because she had to acquiesce to the network. As soon as it was a hit and it was a mega hit, she was like, I'm doing whatever the fuck I want. So I never had that chance to do that. We fought for every single one because Showtime didn't want to give out a series per se. Not for us, not my series. They just weren't doing that. We were one of only 6 specials that year. So they were already downsizing by the time they gave us a deal. So each special we had to really push for. And of course, the second special premiered the weekend before the pandemic. Yeah. Lost so much money and so much work like in one day. I was like, oh, that's great. That's great. And then the third special was filmed during the pandemic. It was towards the end of the pandemic, but we knew that if we had the deal for the third special, we knew if we didn't get it done soon, we were never doing it. So that's how all of them started.
How did you bring up the pandemic? How did you deal with it mentally? Because you're sitting there, you finally have this great idea, you got your second special. All right, we're gonna start kicking ass. And then all of a sudden, whoop, you can't go out and perform. How did you cope with it? Because it's a matter of, I talked to a lot of musicians who were actually enjoyed it for the first 6 months because they didn't have to go on the road so much. They didn't,
Right.
they got to spend time with their families because they're just, then they could, we could record in the studio and send it. It's different than comedy. A musician can record anywhere and do it. How did you deal with it mentally when that happened? Because one, you've had a great career and you've got this great thing going and you're like, all right. And then fucking stop. How did you deal with it?
I think everyone dealt with it differently. I got very depressed because, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, this is the only thing I was meant to do. Do you know what I mean? Like I left the business for about 6 months. My mother-in-law was very ill, so I was taking care of her. So I was an agent for 6 months, which was great because it taught me everything I needed to know about business. But that wasn't during the pandemic. But all of a sudden, it was like, what? I mean, what else? And you have to say in my family. So my husband works on Broadway. He's a child guardian. So Broadway's gone. My son works in music venues. So all of his work, like all 3 of us were like, what the fuck is happening? Because we literally had everything that we've ever wanted to do in live entertainment was gone. And it was very depressing for me. I mean, I didn't do anything. I literally, and I'm sure I'm not the first person, I gained probably 20 pounds because I was making such good food. I mean, I was making pizzas that were like gigantic. And, in the, when you're young, you're like, oh, we'll just eat a little bit. We were eating giant pizzas, chicken pot pie, bacon, whatever we could, because we were all, and it was very funny because, there were certain things that were open, which is always so funny, the grocery stores and the liquor stores. And so me and my husband, we would walk and we'd get a bottle, we'd wait online to say we'd like a bottle of this. And at the end, we were like, fuck it, we had cases of wine delivered because we really thought it was the end of the world. Like, what are we going to do? So it was very hard for me. And literally what had happened is we had just booked the first tour, and it was like 2 weeks straight, and it was so much money. And my agent called me and went, it's all gone. I went, great, thank you. What are you going to do? It was very depressing. But what I did, and I thought, my husband's very smart about this stuff. He said, because after about 3 months, he goes, you got to start doing something. I wasn't even doing Zoom shows because I hated them so much. He goes, you better start writing because this is going to end. And when it ends, you want to be at the forefront of it. And he was right, because what we did in New York is, I don't know if you guys did in Philly, right? You're in Philly, right?
Right outside, yeah.
Yeah.
In Jersey, right across the bridge.
The Donnie, who owned Stand Up New York, he called me and said, would you do stuff outside? I said, sure. So we would do shows in Central Park, which is right outside my apartment building. So I started to be able to go out and perform. And, like sometimes there were dogs barking or there's music playing and babies around. But it was just like, oh, we can interact again. Because that's when we found out that we could do stuff outside. But it was tough. It still blows my mind. Like my father passed before it happened, because I know he would have been like, well, yeah, he would have been like, what do you mean I can't go out? Because he was in a nursing home. He'd have been pissed if I couldn't come see him.
So now, after the pandemic, now where is your direction going for Funny Women at a Certain Age? What are your plans? Because you have a one-person show now coming, so that probably branches it away. But what you've done, what, 3 or 4 specials?
We've done 3 specials, and I'm hoping that we can do a bunch more. Like I said, it's a lineup show more so than like the 5 women and stuff. I think it's funny because that whole time when there were all those different, like MTV and VH1 and even the Improv and Caroline's, they don't have them anymore. I think we should bring that back. I think that's a great way to introduce comics to the audiences, because first of all, it's a no-brainer. You're doing 7-8 minutes, and like we said at the beginning of the show, everyone has a good 7-8 minutes. Do you know what I mean? So that's what I hope. I'm hoping that we can get a deal going where we can do some more of these shows. That's really, but the summer sucks. I'm sure it sucks for you. Summer for comics is just like, and I've been in stand-up for 40 years. And every summer I go, I don't have any work in the summer. You'd think I would know by this point to book something in the fucking summer. So we start back up. The Funny Women stuff starts back up in the fall. We'll be back on the road and everything, and we're booked pretty much through April of 26. So you just have to learn. You're like, all right, summer's here. That's why I'm working on the solo show, because I have time. I don't have to worry about it.
Now with the Funny Women, how much time does each person get?
It depends. I would say most likely, it really does depend, but usually, because I'm on the show and it's usually me and 2 others. Sometimes it's 3 others. So then it's probably about 20, 25 each. If it's just the 3 of us, it's usually like 30, but I break it up because I'm hosting. I always host the shows.
Now, you had mentioned earlier you directed Jim Florentine, and it's funny, I still remember me, him, and Bobby Levy playing a place called the Carousel in Ocean City. And I had long hair at the time, and we looked like a bunch of hoodlums. And we get like the leather overcoats. And I still remember Jim, that was when he was Jim, and he had the long curly blonde hair. How did you end up directing his show? What was the path to having that done?
Well, it was funny. I went to, he was doing the show somewhere, and Chris Italia from The Stand, I don't know if he was managing him at the time, but I had said to Chris, knew that I was starting to look into directing, and he said, you should come see Florentine's show. So we went to see his show, And Jim and I had knew of each other. We didn't really know each other, and it was good. And he knew that I was looking to direct stuff, and he goes, "So what'd you think?" I said it's really good. It needs work. And he was so mad at me. He just looked at me like, "What do you mean?" Like, and we didn't speak, right? So it was fine, I mean, like it was good, but it needed work. And so I don't know, maybe 6 months later, I'm working at Uncle Vinny's down by the shore, and he walked in to do a guest spot, and I'm sitting, in the green room, wherever and he just looked, and it was like we had been talking. He just looks at me and goes, "What would you change?" It was like 6 months had gone by. He said, "What would you change?" And I said, "I'll give you this one for free." I told him what I thought, and then we started working together. And he was great. You know, I, I loved what he did with that show. I mean, I brought some really, I thought it was a very hard show to do. It talked about a lot of hard things, but he pulled it off. He really did. I wish he'd bring it on the road. It's a great show.
So I always ask this question at the end of my interviews. Looking back at your career, and you've had a great career, you've done a lot of different things. It's all been centered around stand up, though, Vegas, everything, the shows now. What are some things that you are, and it can be personal or it can be professional, that you're proud of? When you look back at your career, what are you proud of?
Well, the proudest thing, and I know this is going to sound cliche, but the proudest thing is my kid. I mean, I raised a terrific boy. Man, he's 33. He's a boy to me. But I really, I look at him and I'm like, wow. Me and my husband did that. He is, I mean, and he's biting. He's probably the only one that can really, like, he's very sarcastic. I don't know where he gets that from, but I mean, like, he can be brutal with me, and it's fun. I love watching it because he doesn't, like, we always joke, when is he going to be a comedian? I said, don't worry. That's fucking coming soon. Don't worry. But I mean, I'm the proudest of him, and I guess I'm proudest about the specials that I was able to pull that off. Like you said before about older women. What's funny is we did the show. The first special premiered in 2019, and I want to say Hacks came out afterwards. I'm almost positive. I'm not. But like I remember, and then and Schitt's Creek, with all these older strong women. I'm like, so I'm always like, my show premiered here, this premiered. You're welcome. Do you know what I mean? Like I'd like to think that I had something to do with the fact that now more than ever, you're seeing this great pro-aging movement, even in Hollywood. I mean, it's they're the women in Hollywood are still worried about how they look per se, but there's a lot more. I was going to say Maisel, but she was young. But I think there's a lot more roles for older women, and I would like to think that because the first special we found out because they wouldn't tell us what the ratings were until the second special was out, but the first special was Showtime's highest rated comedy special of 2019. So it kicked ass, and people were like, yeah, we want to see more of this. So I'm proud of that. I'm proud that I moved the needle a little bit. It needs to be moved a hell of a lot more, but I'm only one woman and I'm old and I'm tired.
Well, there you go. I want to thank you for coming on. This has been great. As I said, Julia mentioned you, and I've known Julia, God, for years. What's funny is I worked with Julia when she was rich. Mm-hmm. And when I was first dating my wife, I would come back from LA once a month. And I kept seeing this Julia Scotti. I'm like, why don't I know this comic? And Rich was Rich Gagliardi and Rich Scotti and Rick Scotti. He had like more names than John Cougar Mellencamp. And I finally said to the one owner, I go, who is this guy? I was like, holy shit. So now I've gotten to know Jolie, and she's great. But she said, because I want to get more females on the show, one thing. And two, she said, oh yeah, you should get Carole Montgomery. So your play, the one person show, is June 10th and 11th in Vegas, right?
Wait a minute. I think it's 11th and 12th, actually. I'm going to be in Vegas.
11th, 12th, okay.
Yeah. Hold on. June, 11th and 12th. It's called the Cheap Shot Showroom. It's on Fremont Street. It's at 8:00. You can get tickets at falloutfringe.org. ORG, yeah. And then the Funny Women brand, just go to Funny Women of a Certain Age. We're all over the internet. And come to a show, If you're old, you will like it. If you're young, you will like it. That's the thing I love. When we shot, especially the first special, half of the crowd was millennials. We shot it in Brooklyn at the Bell House, which is like hipster central. So most of them were my son's friends. I'm not going to lie, but they were there and they were a great crowd.
So there you go, people. Go look up Carole Montgomery. Go to her show if you're in Vegas. Also look up Funny Women at a Certain Age. I'll go to my website. Besides, I want to thank Jimmy Corhan for producing the show. He produces all these great comedy podcasts here on Comedy Trainwreck Productions. He's got John Kensel's show. He has Coleman Green's show. He's got a whole bunch of shows. So follow him and follow Comedy Trainwreck. My other podcast, CooperTalk.net. You can go check that out. I have over 1,040 episodes up there. Recently, Tom Petty's original drummer, Stan Lynch, was on my show. Great guy, great story. So check that out. Also, when you're on YouTube, look up the Coop Tank. That's my weekly show. I've taken off the last few weeks. It's a business roundtable. I get 3 local business people. We talk about motivation. We talk about networking. We just talk about the business, and we talk a lot of shit. And so, yeah, that's about it. So keep watching my show. Follow my show. Like my show. Follow Carole. Follow Jimmy. And you all have a wonderful, wonderful week. And I'll talk to you next time.
Bye. Thanks.
Coop's Comedy Corner.